The two most dangerous men in the city were planning a murder, and they were doing it 3 feet away from a fat woman on her knees, scrubbing the floor, because as far as either of them was concerned, she wasn't a person. She was furniture. She was the help. She was a heavy-set cleaning lady in a grey uniform with a bucket and a bad knee, invisible the way a lamp is invisible, and so they spoke freely. Names, dates, a shipment, arrival, a body that needed to disappear by Friday. And Sarah, head down, rag moving in slow, patient circles across the marble, did not miss a single word. She never did. That was rather the point of her, because under the grey uniform, taped flat against the small of her back, where no one would ever think to look at a woman they'd already decided not to look at, was a digital recorder. And it was running. Her name, her real name, was not Sarah, but she had been Sarah for 6 weeks now. Sarah the cleaner, Sarah who came Tuesdays and Fridays, Sarah who said yes, sir, and of course, sir, and kept her eyes on the floor. She had built Sarah carefully, the way she built every cover, out of the single most reliable material in the world, other people's assumptions. She had learned a long time ago that you didn't need to hide in this job. You just needed to be the kind of person the powerful had already trained themselves to overlook. And a big woman with a mop in a world run by men who measured everyone by what they could use or want was the most invisible thing there was. She had stopped being insulted by it years ago, somewhere in the academy, in the long nights learning to be 3 different women. She'd made a quiet peace with her own body and everything the world projected onto it. And then she'd done something the world never expected. She'd weaponized it. Every sneer that slid off her, every gaze that passed through her, every man who said something he should never have said in front of her because surely she didn't matter. All of it was fuel. They thought her size made her less. She had built an entire career on letting them keep thinking it, right up until the moment it was too late for them. The man whose floor she was scrubbing was named Matteo Falcone, and according to the 4-inch file that had sent her into this house, he was one of the largest money launderers on the eastern seaboard. The Bureau wanted him. They had wanted him for 2 years, and 6 weeks ago they had finally found their way in, not through a wire, not through an informant, but through a cleaning company that serviced his estate, and a senior agent who looked at Sarah and saw the one operative in the building nobody would ever suspect. What none of them knew yet, not the Bureau, not Matteo, not the dangerous men discussing murder over her bent head, was that Sarah was very good at her job. Too good, maybe, because in 6 weeks of scrubbing this man's floors and emptying this man's wastebaskets and listening to everything this man's world said in front of the furniture, she had started to notice something that wasn't in the 4-inch file, something that didn't fit, something that was beginning, very quietly, to feel less like the case the Bureau had handed her, and more like a story someone wanted her to believe. But that was later. That came after. On the morning this begins, Sarah was simply a cleaning lady on her knees, recording a murder being planned above her head, doing the job she'd been sent to do. And the most powerful man in the city walked past her without a glance, the way he had 100 times, with no idea whatsoever that the woman he'd hired to mop his marble was about to take his entire world apart, and then, when it mattered most, be the only person left standing who could put it back together. 6 weeks earlier, in a windowless room that smelled of burnt coffee and old carpet, a senior agent named Raymond Caro had slid the 4-inch file across the table and said the words that put Sarah inside Matteo Falcone's house. Nobody's gotten close in 2 years. He's careful. He's paranoid. He vets everyone. Caro had tapped the file. Everyone except the people he doesn't see. You go in as domestic staff. You keep your eyes open, you get us something we can use in court. 90 days, maximum. In and out. Sarah had read the file twice that night, the way she read everything twice. Once for what it said, once for what it wanted her to feel. And even then, On night one, before she'd ever set foot in the estate, something about it had sat wrong in her stomach. She couldn't name it yet. It was just a faint professional itch, the same itch she imagined a jeweler felt holding a diamond that was a little too perfect. But she had a job, and a good operative doesn't refuse an assignment over a feeling, so she folded the itch away and went to work, becoming Sarah. And here is the thing most people never understood about what she did. The thing that made her, quietly, one of the best the Bureau had. Building a cover was not about disguise. It was about giving people permission to believe what they already wanted to believe. She didn't have to act invisible. She simply had to walk into a house full of powerful, dangerous, deeply superficial men as a large woman in a cleaning uniform and let their own assumptions do all the work she would otherwise have to do herself. They looked at her and saw less threat, less intelligence, less worth noticing, and every single one of those assumptions was a brick in the wall she hid behind. The world had spent her whole life trying to make her feel small. She had simply learned to climb inside that smallness and use it as a room with a one-way mirror. So she scrubbed floors, she emptied bins, she wiped down the long table where Matteo Falcone held his meetings, and she did it slowly, thoroughly, during exactly the hours those meetings ran. And not one man in that house ever lowered his voice for the cleaning lady. She learned their names. She learned their routines, their tempers, who feared whom. She learned that the guard named Bruno had a sick mother and took private calls in the east stairwell, and that the accountant who visited on Thursdays always parked his car at an angle as if he might need to leave fast. She gathered all of it the way she gathered dust, patiently, invisibly, a little more each day. And the more she gathered, the louder that night one itch became. Because Matteo Falcone did not behave like the man in the file. The file said, ruthless. And he could be cold, yes. She watched him end a man's career over a lie with 3 flat sentences and never raise his voice. But the file also said reckless, arrogant, sloppy with money, a launderer moving dirty cash through a dozen front companies, leaving the kind of trail the Bureau was sure they'd find if they could just get someone inside. And the man Sarah actually watched, day after day, was the opposite of sloppy. He read every document himself. He trusted almost no one. He kept his real books somewhere even she, with 6 weeks and a cleaning cart and the run of the house, could not find, which was not the behavior of a careless criminal. It was the behavior of a careful man who knew someone was hunting him. Once, only once, he had spoken to her directly. She'd been wiping the window in his study when he came in unexpectedly, and instead of ignoring her or barking at her to leave, he'd stopped, looked at her, actually looked, which almost no one in that house ever did, and said, "You missed the same corner last Tuesday." Not unkind, just observed. Then, after a pause, she would think about later. Most people in this house don't notice when something's been left undone. I do. It's why I'm still alive. And he'd left, and Sarah had stood there with her rag, heart steady, face blank, and thought, that is a man who watches everything. So how exactly did the Bureau get such a clean, easy, satisfying file on a man who watches everything? She started quietly to look in 2 directions at once. She kept gathering what Caro had sent her for, the names, the meetings, the shipment moving Friday. But she also began, on her own time, in her own head, to do the thing the Bureau hadn't asked her to do. She began to check the file against the man, and the gaps started lining up into a shape she didn't like. The front companies the Bureau flagged were real, but every transaction tying them to Matteo had been authorized through a single intermediary account, 1 layer removed, always 1 layer removed, never his own signature. The evidence wasn't of a man laundering money. It was of a man being positioned to look like he was. It was, she thought, almost too good, almost designed. The kind of trail you don't stumble onto after 2 years of failing. The kind someone lays for you neatly and then waits for you to follow. And there was one more thing. A small thing. The thing that would, in the end, unravel everything. In 6 weeks inside that house, Sarah had seen Matteo Falcone meet with everyone the file warned her about. Except one name. The file's central claim was that Matteo ran his laundering through a man called Nico Greco. But in 6 weeks of invisible, total surveillance, Sarah had never once seen Nico Greco set foot in that house. She'd never heard Matteo say his name. It was as if the most important figure in the Bureau's entire case against this man existed everywhere on paper and nowhere at all in the actual life of the person she was watching. Which left her, at the end of 6 weeks, kneeling on Matteo Falcone's marble floor with a recorder taped to her back, holding 2 truths that could not both be real. The Bureau's truth, which said this man was a criminal she'd been sent to catch. And the truth her own eyes had gathered, dust by dust, which whispered that someone had built her a beautiful, airtight case against a man who might not have done the thing she was there to prove. She just didn't know, yet, who, or why, or that the answer would put her in more danger than Matteo Falcone ever could. The woman who would become Sarah's most dangerous problem arrived on a Thursday, and unlike every other person in that house, she noticed the cleaning lady within the first 10 minutes. Her name was Vivian Cole, and she was Matteo Falcone's legal counsel. Though counsel undersold her the way cleaner undersold Sarah, she was elegant in the specific, expensive way of a woman who had decided early that beauty was a tool and intelligence was a weapon, and there was no reason on earth not to carry both. She wore charcoal and pale silk. She moved through the estate like she owned the air in it, and where every man in that house looked at Sarah and saw less, Vivian Cole looked at Sarah once, across the length of the marble hall, and did something none of them had done in 6 weeks. She paused. It lasted half a second. A flicker. The cleaning lady scrubbing the baseboard, the lawyer's heels clicking past, and a single beat where Vivian's eyes rested on Sarah a moment longer than nothing required, the way a person glances at a painting that is very slightly crooked. Then she was gone, down the hall, into Matteo's study. But Sarah, who read people for a living, felt that half-second land on her like a hand on the shoulder, because she understood, instantly and completely, what it meant. Every other predator in this house hunted by looking for threats. Vivian Cole hunted by looking for things that didn't fit. And a large, quiet, invisible cleaning woman who had been here 6 weeks and never once made a mistake was, to a mind like that, very slightly crooked. Sarah did not change her routine. That was the discipline of the work. The amateur, made afraid, adjusts, and the adjustment is the tell. She kept scrubbing the same corners at the same hours, but that night, in the small rented room where she stopped being Sarah for a few hours, she pulled the threads harder because she now had 2 clocks running against each other. The slow clock of her investigation and the much faster clock of how long it would take Vivian Cole to put a name to what didn't fit. She went back to the thing that wouldn't leave her alone, the intermediary account. The one that connected every flagged transaction to Matteo while keeping his own signature one clean layer away. She had memorized the routing details weeks ago, never written down, carried in the same trained memory that held everything else. And now, on her own laptop, through channels the Bureau didn't know she still had, she did what Caro's file had so conveniently never done. She traced the account backward instead of forward. The case had been built on where the money went, into Matteo's front companies, the trail pointing at him like a row of arrows. No one had asked where the authorization to move it came from, and when Sarah followed that question, peeling the intermediary account back, one layer at a time, the way she'd once peeled back every assumption to build her own cover, she found something that stopped her cold at her kitchen table at 2 a.m. The account that made Matteo Falcone look like a launderer had been opened with documents, and the documents had been notarized, witnessed, and filed by a law office. His law office. Vivian Cole's signature was on the incorporation papers. For a long moment, Sarah sat very still. The way she'd taught herself to sit still in the half-second before everything changes. Because the shape was finally clear, and it was uglier and cleverer than anything in the 4-inch file. Matteo Falcone was not running money through these companies. Someone was running money through these companies and building a paper trail that pointed at him. Someone with the legal authority to create accounts in his name, someone inside his own walls, someone he trusted with his signature. The case the Bureau handed her wasn't an investigation. It was a frame, and the architect of that frame had just walked through the marble hall in charcoal and pale silk and paused for half a second on the one person in the house capable of seeing it. But even then, and this was the part that kept her awake until dawn, even then, it didn't fully fit, because a frame this expensive, this patient, served someone's purpose, and Sarah could not yet see whose. Vivian was the hand. Vivian was not the reason. A lawyer doesn't spend 2 years and millions of dollars building an airtight federal case against her own client for the pleasure of it. Someone had hired the hand. Someone wanted Matteo Falcone not just dead, but disgraced first, convicted, erased with his own name on the indictment, and that someone had been patient enough and connected enough to reach all the way into the FBI and make sure the case landed on an agent who would carry it the last mile without asking the question Sarah was now, far too late and far too alone, finally asking. Who handed Raymond Caro this file in the first place? She closed the laptop. 2 clocks were running, and she'd just understood that neither of them was the one she should have been watching. The dangerous question was no longer whether Matteo Falcone was guilty. It was what would happen to a cleaning lady who'd been sent into a frame job to seal it shut the moment the people who built it realized she'd figured out it was a frame. The thing about a frame as careful as the one built around Matteo Falcone is that it has a date. Sarah understood this the way she understood most dangerous things, slowly and then all at once. A disgrace then destroy operation doesn't wait forever. The paper trail existed to support a moment, an arrest, a leak, a death made to look like justice. And the shipment she'd heard those 2 men planning over her bent head, the one moving Friday, was not, she now realized, a crime. It was the trap. Someone had arranged for Matteo Falcone to be standing near a great deal of incriminating cargo on Friday night, exactly where the beautiful, airtight federal case would need him to be, which gave Sarah a problem she had not trained for. Her job was to gather evidence and walk away. Every instinct the Bureau had drilled into her said, "This is bigger than your cover. Report up the chain. Let the machine handle it." But the chain was the problem. The file had come from inside the machine. If she reported what she'd found, she'd be reporting it to the exact people who'd built the frame. And she'd be handing them the one thing they were missing: confirmation that their inside operative had figured it out. She would not be sounding an alarm. She would be signing 2 death warrants, Matteo's and her own. So she did the thing that ended Sarah the cleaner forever. On Thursday night, the night before the shipment, she stopped scrubbing floors and walked, uninvited, into Matteo Falcone's study. He was at his desk. He looked up, and to his credit, the surprise lasted only a fraction of a second before it hardened into something watchful. A cleaning lady did not walk into his study at night. "You're lost," he said quietly, and one hand had already moved, unhurried, toward the drawer. "And you should leave before you find out how lost." "The shipment Friday is a setup," Sarah said. She kept her voice level, her hands visible, her body still, the posture of someone who has decided that the next 90 seconds will be survived on words alone. "You're being walked into a room full of evidence that will end you. Not kill you, end you. Conviction, your name on a federal indictment, everything you've built dismantled in your own courtroom while you watch. And the person who built it for them has been signing documents in your name for 2 years, one clean layer away from your own signature every single time. She paused. I can tell you her name. But first, you're going to want to ask how a cleaning lady knows any of this. Let's save time. I'm not a cleaning lady. I was sent into this house to seal the case against you. And about 3 weeks ago, I realized the case was a lie. The room went very still. Matteo Falcone did not reach the rest of the way into the drawer. He also did not relax. He simply looked at her, the long, total look of a man recalculating everything fast, and Sarah let him because she'd known this was the gamble. She had just handed the most dangerous man in the city the knowledge that she was a federal agent inside his home. By every rule she'd ever been taught, it was insane. But she had read this man for 6 weeks, and she had bet her life on the one thing the file got wrong about him. That a man this careful, this starved of people who told him the truth, would recognize the truth when it finally walked into his study at night and refused to be afraid of him. 6 weeks, he said at last, slowly. You've been in my house 6 weeks. A pause. I told you once you missed a corner. You looked at me like you were filing it away. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not warmth, not yet, but the cold respect of a predator, recognizing another one. Everyone I've ever trusted has wanted something from me. Money, protection, a piece of what I'm holding. You walk in here, tell me you were sent to destroy me, and the thing you want is to warn me. He leaned back. Why? Because I don't seal frames, Sarah said. I catch criminals. There's a difference, and somewhere in the last 6 weeks it stopped being a difference I was willing to ignore. She held his gaze. And because whoever did this used me to do it. They counted on the fat, invisible cleaning lady to be too busy being grateful for the work to ever look up. They made the same mistake you made the first day I walked in here. A faint, level smile. Everyone always does. And that, not a touch, not a glance, nothing the romance novels would have recognized, was the moment something changed between Matteo Falcone and the woman who'd come to destroy him. Not attraction. Something rarer and slower and far more dangerous to them both. The recognition, on each side, of the one quality each had spent a lifetime unable to find in anyone else. He had never met someone he couldn't buy, frighten, or predict. She had never met a man who looked at her and saw, immediately and without being told, exactly how dangerous she was, and was glad of it. The name, Matteo said. Sarah told him. She watched it land, watched the man absorb, that his own counsel, the woman in charcoal and pale silk who had sat at his right hand for 2 years, had been quietly building the instrument of his destruction the entire time. He did not explode. He did the thing she was beginning to understand he always did with pain. He went still, and cold, and precise. Vivian, he said softly, and the name came out like something being set down very carefully so it wouldn't break and cut someone. Then, after a long moment, she noticed you. Tuesday, she asked me who'd hired the new cleaner. His dark eyes came back to Sarah's. I told her not to worry about it. The help. Then we have until she stops believing that, Sarah said. Which, if she's as good as her paperwork, is already over. So here's where we are, Mr. Falcone. You don't trust me, I don't trust you, and we are the only 2 people in this city who both know the truth and want the same person to fail. That's not friendship. It's not anything you have to like. But for the next 24 hours, it's the only alliance either of us has. The question is whether you're smart enough to take it. And the most powerful man in the city looked for a long moment at the cleaning lady who had just turned his entire world inside out, and reached, slowly, to close the desk drawer. They had 24 hours, and they spent the first 6 of them in the one place no one would look for either of them together, the staff kitchen, after midnight, where a cleaning lady belonged, and a boss never went. Matteo brought what Sarah couldn't reach, the real books, the ones she'd spent 6 weeks failing to find, pulled from a safe behind a wine rack she'd dusted 100 times. And Sarah brought what Matteo had never had, the trained eye of someone who hunted frames for a living, and the one piece of the picture he'd been missing, that the trail didn't just point at him by accident. It had been aimed. For hours, they worked the way 2 suspicious professionals work, passing pages without touching hands, checking each other's logic, each waiting for the other to lie. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, Sarah found it, or thought she did. Buried in the real books was a name that appeared nowhere in the Bureau's file, attached to nearly every transaction Vivian had used to build the frame. A man named Dominic Ferro, Matteo's distributor, a mid-level operator who'd handled real shipments for the family for years, and whose access, Sarah realized, was exactly broad enough to feed Vivian the legitimate transactions she'd then twisted into evidence. Ferro had the reach. Ferro had the motive. Matteo had passed him over for promotion twice, and Ferro, conveniently, was the man coordinating tomorrow's shipment, the one walking Matteo into the trap. "It's Ferro," Sarah said. The relief in her own voice surprised her. The specific, dangerous relief of a hunter who thinks the hunt is over. "Vivian built the paper, but Ferro fed it to her, and Ferro's running the setup tomorrow. We take him before the shipment. We flip him. The whole frame comes apart." She laid the pages out, the arrows all pointing one clean direction. "It fits. It all fits." Matteo looked at the pages for a long time, and then he said the thing that made Sarah's stomach drop. Not because he was wrong, but because she'd taught herself, across an entire career, to be suspicious of exactly this feeling. "It fits perfectly," he said slowly. "Doesn't it?" The words hung there, and Sarah heard, in her own head, the echo of the night one itch, the jeweler holding the diamond that was a little too perfect. She had said almost the same words to herself 6 weeks ago about the Bureau's file. Too good, too clean, almost designed. And here she was at 3 in the morning, exhausted, frightened, running out of clock, doing the precise thing she'd built her career on catching other people doing, reaching gratefully for the first answer, tidy enough to let her stop looking. She made herself look again, not at what pointed to Ferro, at what didn't, and it was small, the way it was always small. Dominic Ferro had the access to feed Vivian those transactions, yes, but Sarah had spent 6 weeks memorizing the rhythms of that house. And Ferro was a blunt instrument, a man who parked his car at an angle so he could leave fast, who took bribes, who cut corners. The frame around Matteo wasn't blunt. It was patient, 2 years patient, layer after layer patient. It was built by someone who understood that the most convincing guilty man is one who never signs his own name. And Dominic Ferro had never in his life had the discipline to stay one clean layer back from anything. Someone had given Ferro just enough rope to look like the architect, which meant someone needed a second person to blame if the first frame ever cracked. "Ferro's not the reason," Sarah said quietly, and the relief drained out of her, replaced by something colder. "He's the spare. Whoever built this didn't just frame you, Mr. Falcone. They built a frame inside the frame. Ferro sitting one layer down, ready to take the fall if anyone ever looked past you. Vivian's the hand. Ferro's the fuse they can blow if the hand gets exposed." She sat back. This was built by someone who plans for being caught, someone who always leaves a smaller, guiltier man between themselves and the truth. That's not a distributor with a grudge. That's not even a lawyer. She felt the last piece turn over, and she did not like where it pointed. That's someone who's done this before, professionally. Someone who knows exactly how an investigation thinks, because building frames that survive investigation is their job. Matteo watched her face change. "You know who," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know what," Sarah said. "Not who. Not yet." She stared at the pages, at the two-layered trap, at the awful professional elegance of it. Vivian didn't reach into the FBI on her own. Lawyers don't have that arm. Somebody made sure my file came pre-built, pre-cleaned, handed to an agent who'd close it without asking questions. Somebody chose me because I was supposed to be too invisible to look up. She finally raised her eyes to his. "The frame around you was built by someone inside the law, Mr. Falcone. And I think the only reason I can't see their face yet is that I've probably already been taking orders from it." Outside, the sky was beginning to gray toward the Friday that was supposed to end Matteo Falcone. And somewhere across the city, the person who had spent 2 years building a perfect cage was about to learn that the invisible woman they'd chosen precisely because she'd never look up had done the one thing they'd staked everything on her never doing. Vivian Cole did not wait for Friday. That was her first lesson to Sarah, delivered before either of them had said a word to the other. People who build patient traps are never patient when the trap is threatened. She had spent Thursday confirming what the half-second pause in the hallway first told her, pulling the cleaning company's records, the references that didn't quite hold up under a second call, the 6-week-old hire whose paperwork was just slightly too clean. By Friday morning, Vivian Cole knew that the fat, invisible cleaner was not a cleaner. And she moved. She moved the way the truly intelligent move, not with a gun, but with a phone call. At 7 a.m., while Sarah was still in Matteo's study, going over the last of the real books, Vivian called the one person who needed to know that the operation was compromised. She did not call the police. She did not call Matteo. She called the man who had handed the Bureau its beautiful, pre-built file 2 years in the making. Because Vivian Cole had never been the architect. She had only ever been the hand. And the architect needed to know that his invisible little insurance policy had looked up. Sarah's phone buzzed at 7:14, a secure line, a number she knew. Raymond Caro. "Pull out," Caro said before she could speak. His voice was calm, fatherly, exactly as it had been across that burnt coffee table 6 weeks ago. "Operations blown. We've got chatter that Falcone made you. I need you out of that house in the next 20 minutes. Leave everything. Just walk." A pause, warm, reasonable. "You did good work. This one's just gone bad. It happens." And there it was. Sarah stood very still in Matteo Falcone's study, phone to her ear, and felt the last piece drop into place with a quiet, sickening click. Because Raymond Caro had just made the mistake every clever, guilty man eventually makes. He knew something he had no clean way of knowing. "We've got chatter that Falcone made you." But Matteo hadn't told anyone. The only person alive who knew Sarah's cover was blown was the person standing 10 feet away, and Vivian Cole, who'd figured it out that morning. There was no bureau chatter. There was no intercept. There was only one way Raymond Caro could know that Matteo Falcone had made his agent. If Vivian Cole had called him directly. If the senior FBI agent running the case and the lawyer building the frame were working the same operation from opposite ends and had been the entire time. "How do you know he made me, Ray?" Sarah asked quietly. "I never reported contact." The pause on the line was a half-second long, the same half-second as Vivian's pause in the hallway. The sound of a very intelligent person realizing, a fraction too late, that they have just stepped on the one floorboard that creaks. And in that half-second, Raymond Caro, 22 years a decorated agent, The man who'd recruited her. The man whose files she'd carried into this house like scripture. Stopped being her handler and became the last name on her list. Sarah, he said, and the warmth was gone now, scraped clean. Walk out of that house. This is bigger than you understand, and you're standing in the middle of it holding nothing. Walk out, and you go home. Stay, and you're an agent who went rogue and died in a mafia raid she wasn't authorized to be at. Think about which version of you survives the paperwork. He hung up. And Sarah understood the full architecture at last, all of it, in the cold clarity she usually only felt in the half-second before everything changed. Caro and Vivian, a dirty federal agent and a brilliant lawyer, building a frame so perfect it would launder a murder through a federal conviction. Matteo Falcone destroyed by the law itself, his empire seized, his name a federal case file, and somewhere in the wreckage, two people quietly taking everything he'd left behind. And the genius of it, the truly vicious genius, was the woman they'd chosen to seal it. An agent so far down the chain, so easy to overlook, so invisible, that when it all went wrong she could be rewritten in a single phone call into a rogue who died where she shouldn't have been. They hadn't just used her size and her silence to get into the house. They'd planned, from the very beginning, to use them to bury her. It's not just Vivian, Matteo said. He'd been watching her face. He'd gotten good in 24 hours at reading the woman who read everyone. Your own people. My handler, Sarah said. The man who sent me. He and your lawyer have been running this together from the start. The shipment tonight isn't just your trap, Mr. Falcone. It's mine too. I walk out that gate. I'm a loose end with a badge. I stay. I'm a rogue agent who died in the raid. They built an ending where every road leads to a grave. Yours or mine or both. She set the phone down on his desk, very gently. They thought of everything. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the grey Friday sky was brightening toward the evening that was meant to end them both, and Sarah felt it. The pull she'd spent a career resisting, the human gravity of a trap this total, the urge to do something loud, something desperate, to run or to fight or to scream the truth at a world that had already been arranged not to believe her. A discredited agent's word against a decorated handler and a respected attorney. The fat cleaning lady against the system itself. She had, on paper, nothing. And then she did the thing that had defined her since the first floor she'd ever scrubbed in that house. She got very still. She sat down across from Matteo Falcone. And in the quiet, the cold, the running out clock, she started, not to panic and not to run, but to think. Because they had thought of everything. Everything except the one thing every single person in this story had gotten wrong about her. From Caro to Vivian to the man across the desk. They had all assumed that a woman they could make invisible was a woman who wasn't watching. And Sarah had been watching for 6 weeks, recording everything, missing nothing, including, she now realized, the one mistake the architects had made the moment they decided she didn't matter enough to be careful around. They built an ending for both of us, she said slowly, and for the first time since the phone rang, something dangerous moved behind her eyes. But they built it, assuming I'd never be in a room with you long enough to compare notes. They never planned for the cleaner and the target to sit down at the same table. She looked up. Mr. Falcone, I think I know how we end them. But I'm going to need the one thing in this house I was never able to find. And you're going to have to trust the woman who was sent here to destroy you tonight. Completely. The thing Sarah had never been able to find in 6 weeks was Vivian Cole's own records. The private set, the architect's true ledger, the place where a careful person keeps the proof of what they've built so that their partner can never cut them out of it. Because that was the flaw Sarah had finally seen, the one mistake the architects made by being exactly who they were. Caro and Vivian didn't trust each other. People who launder a murder through a federal frame never do. Each of them would have kept their own copy of everything, insurance against the other. And insurance, unlike a frame, is not built to be hidden from investigators. It's built to be found fast by the right person at the right moment. Sarah just had to become that moment. Her records are in this house, Sarah said. Not the office. Too exposed, too subpoena-able. She'd keep her insurance close, somewhere she controls, somewhere she visits often enough to access, but secure enough that no one else would. You've watched her for 2 years. Where does Vivian Cole go in this house that she has no professional reason to go? Matteo was quiet for a moment. Then, the East Library. She reads there. Alone. I always thought... He stopped. I always thought she just liked the quiet. She liked the safe behind the third shelf. They found it in 4 minutes. And while Matteo worked the lock with the patience of a man who'd opened things that didn't want to be opened before, Sarah did the part only she could do. She pulled the recorder from the small of her back, the one that had been running for 6 weeks, and she began, at last, to assemble the thing the architects had never imagined the furniture could build. 6 weeks of audio. Every meeting held over her bent head. Every name spoken in front of the cleaning lady, because surely she didn't matter. And buried in it, she now knew exactly where to look. A conversation from her second week. 2 voices she hadn't been able to place at the time, discussing a shipment and a Friday, and a woman named Cole who would handle the paper. One of those voices, she was now certain, was Raymond Caro. The safe opened. Inside, Vivian's true ledger, the real architecture, 2 years of it, and the single document that turned everything, a private agreement signed by both Vivian Cole and Raymond Caro, dividing what would be left of Matteo Falcone's empire after the federal conviction they were manufacturing. The frame, in their own hands, in their own signatures. The one thing neither of them had ever signed one clean layer back from, because they'd built the whole machine so that the only person who'd ever see this safe was each other. The library door opened. Vivian Cole stood in the doorway in charcoal and pale silk, and she took in the open safe, the documents in Matteo's hands, the cleaning lady standing beside him, and to her enormous credit, she did not flinch. She simply recalculated, the way she always did, fast and elegant and cold. Matteo, she said smoothly, whatever she's shown you, she's a federal agent who infiltrated your home under false identity. Nothing she's touched is admissible. Nothing she says is credible. I can make all of this disappear by Monday, but only if you let me, and only if she's not here to complicate it. Her eyes moved to Sarah, and the contempt in them was almost admiring. You really were the perfect choice. So invisible, right up until you weren't. And Sarah, who had spent her whole life being told to make herself smaller, who had turned that smallness into a one-way mirror, who had been chosen for this precisely because 2 brilliant people were certain she'd never look up, said the only thing the moment required: short, flat, final. You're right that I'm not admissible, she said. I'm not building a court case, Vivian. I'm building a problem the 2 of you can't share. She held up the signed agreement. Because here's what I understood that you didn't. You and Caro built an ending where every road leads to a grave, Matteo's or mine, but you forgot to build one for the day you stopped trusting each other, and I just found the only document in the world that proves both of you are guilty, sitting in a safe you thought only your partner could reach. She let it land. So here's the new ending. Caro already knows I'm compromised. Vivian called him this morning, which means right now he's deciding whether you're a partner or a loose end. And I'm about to make sure he hears that you're the one who left the proof where it could be found. A pause. How long do you think a man like Raymond Caro lets a partner live once he believes she got sloppy? It was not a gun. It was not a threat. It was something Vivian Cole understood far better than either. The precise, surgical turning of a frame against its own architects. The same patient cruelty she'd spent 2 years aiming at Matteo pointed now, perfectly, back down the length of the table at her. Sarah watched it land. Watched the elegant cold mind run the math and arrive, for the first time, at an answer it didn't like. Watched the woman who'd built the perfect cage understand that the invisible cleaner had just locked her inside it, with her own partner. The mask held for 1 second too long, the same tell, the same half-second, and then, beneath the charcoal and the silk, something simply went still. "The thing about being underestimated," Sarah said quietly, gathering the documents, "is that by the time anyone corrects the mistake, it's already far too late. You taught me that. You just thought you were teaching it to someone who didn't matter."
What happened to Raymond Caro and Vivian Cole did not happen with guns, and it did not happen that night. It happened the way the most permanent things in Matteo Falcone's world happened. Quietly, patiently, with their own signatures doing the work. Sarah never had to fire the document she'd found. She only had to let each of them know the other had left it where it could be reached. Trust, once it cracks between two people who've laundered a murder together, does not mend. Within a week, Raymond Caro's 22-year career ended in a federal review he could not explain. His own private agreement surfacing through channels he never traced. Within 2, Vivian Cole's elegant practice quietly dissolved. Her clients, scattering the way they always do, had the first true smell of blood. They had built an ending where every road led to a grave. They had simply never imagined that the two of them would end up standing on those roads, instead of the people they'd chosen to bury. The shipment on Friday never trapped anyone. Matteo Falcone, warned, simply wasn't there. And the beautiful, airtight federal case that had taken 2 years to build collapsed the moment its architect was no longer inside the law to protect it. The 4-inch file became what it had always secretly been, a work of fiction, with no one left willing to swear it was true. And Matteo himself, the man the world, the law, and his own counsel had all agreed to destroy, was, for the first time in 2 years, simply free. Not exonerated in a courtroom. Men like him are never exonerated in courtrooms. But the hand at his throat was gone, and he knew exactly whose patience and whose silence and whose 6 weeks of invisible attention had removed it. He found Sarah at the gate of the estate the next morning, a bag over her shoulder, the grey uniform gone, dressed at last as whoever she actually was. The case was closed. Her cover was spent. There was no professional reason on earth for her to still be standing on his property. And they both knew it. "Stay," Matteo said. It was the same word other men had said to her in other doorways, and it landed differently coming from him, because he did not say it the way a powerful man claims a thing. He said it the way a careful man admits something that costs him. "I have spent my whole life unable to trust a single person who got close to me," he said. "I was right not to. Every one of them wanted something. And then a woman was sent into my house to destroy me, and she's the only person in 20 years who has told me the truth when a lie would have been easier and safer for her." His voice roughened. "You walked in here as no one. You're leaving as the only person I've ever actually been seen by. I am not asking you to stay because I need an agent or a partner or protection. I'm asking because I would be a fool to watch the one person who was never afraid of me walk through that gate." And Sarah looked at him for a long moment. This man, the whole world had agreed was a monster, who had turned out to be, like her, simply someone everyone had decided to see wrongly. And she felt the pull of it. She would not pretend even to herself that she didn't. But she had not become who she was by being chosen. She had become who she was by choosing. Her own work, her own terms. Her own steady refusal to be made small by anyone, including now by a man offering her something that looked a great deal like being kept. "You and I see the world the same way," she said. "That's rare. That's real. And it's exactly why you already know I can't answer that standing at your gate with my badge still warm in my pocket." A faint smile, the first real one she'd allowed herself in 6 weeks. "I spent 6 weeks being the woman you needed me to be. Whatever I am to you next, if I'm anything, it's going to be the woman I actually am. And I haven't decided yet whether she stays in a world like yours. Some things even I have to think about." And she walked through the gate, not rescued, not chosen, not kept. Walking out the same way she'd walked in, on her own terms, owing no one. The most dangerous and least visible person in any room she had ever entered. The woman the architects chose precisely because they were certain she would never look up. They had been wrong about that. They had been wrong, in the end, about everything. Because the person the whole world is trained to overlook is so often the only one who has been watching all along. Sarah solved it. She broke a frame 2 years in the making, turned 2 brilliant predators against each other, and cleared the man everyone wanted buried. Using nothing but the 6 weeks of attention the whole world assumed she was too invisible to be paying. And then, she walked out of that estate the same way she walked in, owing no one. So here's the question she left behind, and I genuinely want your answer. When a woman like Sarah finally has the power to choose, should she choose the man, or should she choose herself? Honestly, I think she walks. I think she's worth a cleaner world than his. But I have a feeling a lot of you are going to disagree with me. So prove me wrong. Comment "stay" if you believe she's earned the right to love on her own terms. Comment "go" if you believe she deserves more than his world could ever give her. And whichever you choose, tell me why. I read every single one. If this story gave you chills, you know what to do. Subscribe, because the next woman they underestimate is even more dangerous than this one. I'll see you there.